Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be on our planet. Welcome. We're so grateful for you to be here, and we look forward to talking to our guest today. So we're going to be talking to Ben shortly. He's gone through, like a lot of us, the JW thinking, mind-altering substances that we had to take sitting at the meetings. What helped Ben? What did Ben do so that he could start moving forward? Well, today we're going to be able to ask him questions. Now, if you see something that piques your interest, then please, in the comments, ask the question. We're here to be able to give practical help from what Ben has learned, what Ben has done, and we're going to find out where he is, what he's doing, and maybe we can find out some of the goals that he's got. So let's bring Ben on and let's find out who Ben is and see what he looks like.
Hey,
good morning, Ben.
Hello, how are you?
Good evening in your case.
Evening for me, yes.
Are you keeping warm?
Yes, not too bad. It's not been too bad today, about 8 degrees or so, I think. Yeah.
8 degrees,
yeah.
That's
yeah.
manageable?
Yeah, not too bad.
Well, I won't tell you the temperature we've been having just of late, but it was a very nice day yesterday and we didn't freeze. So, alrighty, Ben, let's make a start. So tell us a little bit about your history in the JWs.
So I have a slightly different background maybe to most, but my parents are mixed. So my mum is a Jehovah's Witness and my dad is an atheist. That came about because they were both in the RAF in the 70s, which is where they met and married. My mum then came across the Jehovah's Witnesses towards the end of her time in the RAF. And when she converted over to them, I was only about 18 months old. So while technically not born in, as good as, because I didn't know anything before that. And believe it or not, my mum actually had herself removed from the RAF because of that conversion. So I think she missed out the last couple of years of service. But so I have a slightly unusual background in that coming from a mixed parents, I also went to a regular school in the UK. So I had a lot of friends who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. So while there's a lot of the commonalities in the sort of the damaging indoctrination that you get as a kid, I also was quite lucky in that I was exposed to non-JW things. So a lot of the families I knew, they homeschooled and didn't mix with other children and so on. So that meant really that I don't think I ever really genuinely believed the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I left at 15, disassociated myself at 15. So I think they knew that things weren't right because from about the age of about 13 and a half, 14, I was being asked to see a brother during the week. So as well as the 3 meetings, I was going over to one of 2 brothers' houses and we would play chess, depending on which brother it was, but we would do some non-JW exercises like chess and things like that. Or sports, and then I would, and then the second half of it would be JW orientated, so reading the Bible, reading the Watchtower, and so on. But by 15, the Jehovah's Witnesses stuff was clashing with the things I wanted to do, and I knew that I didn't believe it. I didn't have any support from my atheist dad. I don't think that was on purpose. I just don't think he realised quite what the Jehovah's Witnesses were and what they do to kids. So I handled my disassociation quite badly. I left a note stuck to my front door with my mum's name written on it, basically just saying I didn't want to go anymore, and I fled to school, and that's how I dealt with it. Obviously that didn't go down particularly well with my mum. As I'm sure you can imagine. My dad isn't very good at being supportive and just bawled me out for the way I did it. Didn't really support me there either once I'd said what I wanted to do. But once we'd got past those first few days, then I was sort of free of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, I thought it was, but then obviously it does so much damage to you on your social skills, your ideas about, as we've talked about before, everything from in your whole life, really. It's your hobbies, your idea about relationships, your idea about politics, your morals, everything. After leaving or after disassociating, my mum hammered me quite a lot for quite a number of years over it. So there was constant comments being made, sometimes really long arguments over whether the Jehovah's Witnesses were the truth and so on. And what I realized sort of into my late teens and early 20s, and at that point I had been exposed to some friends that had been to university, and one chap in particular, Carl, he was big time into his philosophy, his critical thinking, and so on. And that exposure there then started to make me realize that actually, although I could have very high level conversations about why I didn't think the Bible was true and why I didn't think the Jehovah's Witnesses true, I realized that everything that I thought was still based on everything I'd been taught up until the age of 15 or so. Yep. And that I couldn't give good arguments. So the reason I left, a personal feeling that I didn't believe the religion, wasn't actually a sound reason to leave. I had to really be able to, in my head at least, give an honest intellectual argument for that. So that's where I started to become interested in philosophy and critical thinking. Physiology and biology affect how we respond to things as well. And after a couple of instances where I had said flippant and ridiculous things, I realized that I really needed to go back through all of my ideas about people and about morals and about how we deal with people and how I thought about my politics and my attitude towards science and literally break down everything. And that's what I attempted to then do over about the next 10 or 15 years, is to rework, to take all those things I'd been taught as a kid, and to try to understand the arguments behind those, try to understand the biases, because that's a really important thing, that the bias that we bring into any kind of conversation and any kind of worldview is really heavy. But if you understand that bias, then you can work out whether that bias is a legitimate one or not, and you can, to a degree, you can park it so that you can put aside your ideas of things and try to work out whether your view on X is a good view, whether it's supported by evidence, whether there's a rationale behind it, and so on. So what now, 25 years or so of armchair philosophy and critical thinking and so on sort of led us to having conversations a few months ago now. I think the first conversation was about it. And I think it's really critical because Jehovah's Witnesses is a cult, and that still feels really strange to say that I grew up in a cult. As I mentioned to you before, it's the kind of thing you say, you see in the papers, you read in the news. That hasn't happened to me. I'm not in a car crash. I'm not in a cult. I didn't do, all those things that we consider horrendous things. They don't happen to you. That's weird. Right. So, yeah, I've spent all that time really sort of trying to break down those ideas. I think the way the Jehovah's Witnesses do things, the Watchtower, sorry, I should really say, is very insidious. So childhood indoctrination is a big problem. You form your core self by sort of age 11 or 12. So being born in, as most people are, that means you have been indoctrinated for all of your formative years by the Watchtower's beliefs. Your brain doesn't stop developing until the early 20s. So that also means that, most people are sort of coerced into being baptized in their teens. So you're making all those sorts of decisions when your brain isn't fully developed. Your ideas have been brainwashed basically by the cult around you, and that needs tackling, I think. And for those of us who have left that want to look at the life afterwards and things, it's really important. Whether you're talking about your politics or your job choices or your friend choices, how you deal with interactions with people, all of that stuff has been formed and affected by the biases from the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower's ideology.
Yeah, just stop there for a minute. Can I get you to go back and think about one or two of the things that, looking back on them, what were they in the way of major sort of problems for you? What were some of the big things that you had to deal with?
I think relationships was definitely one.
Yep.
The Watchtower's view of marrying before you have sex, for example. So people are more than welcome to form whatever opinions they want on sex. But for me, I was always worried that what happens if you marry a person because you just want to have sex, which happens a lot in those sorts of cults. The Mormons have very young ages for getting married. The Jehovah's Witnesses do, and it's all basically the same thing, because in your teens, your hormones are kicking off. You're not allowed to experiment and learn about the people that you don't like, who you're going to get on with, and so on. So it creates an environment of getting married quite young. So for relationships and the toxic environment that you grow up in, that forced within the Kingdom Halls, they're very much a forced environment. There's a lot of people you wouldn't be associating with, you wouldn't be friends with particularly, if it wasn't for the Jehovah's Witnesses and both being there. So you get a you don't get a healthy view on relationships with people, and you certainly don't get a healthy view on how to have relationships with a partner, whoever that might be. So learning about those sorts of things, and learning about things like sex drive being perfectly natural part of the human existence, and those sorts of things was a real eye opener. And so as a counterpoint, my brother is still a Jehovah's Witness, as is his family.
So
he married yes. So I'm on the precipice that I won't. I refuse not to criticize the Watchtower and the harm it does. I'm aware that in theory, at any time, if my mum found out, or my brother found out, they would probably disown me. So I'm lucky in that I haven't lost them. And I've explained this to people at work and to friends, that it's for the basic reasoning that I hadn't had some water sprinkled on my head, so I wasn't baptized. They were pressurizing towards that, but I didn't do it, and I'm glad now that I didn't do it, because obviously if I had have done that, would have been an automatic disowning. So for that ridiculous technicality, I get to still speak to my mum and to my brother and to his family.
Yep.
Religious stuff does come up. She doesn't try to push it so hard anymore, because after 10 or 15 years of learning a lot about this and being able to make much better arguments and to push back much harder against the kind of things that she was saying, I think she's learned not to raise it. But for me, yeah, I'm on that precipice that that because they don't go online, and because they certainly don't use social media, they don't see me in the debate groups, and they don't see me on groups like this. But if they did, I think that they would probably disown me. So you were talking about things that views that were impactful. I think also my view on the LBGT community, which I'm a staunch supporter of now. When
you say now, what do you mean?
So, well, when I was sort of in my 15s to late teens, coming out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, I still had the somewhat bigoted views that the Jehovah's Witnesses had. And they use cliche defenses like it's not the sinner, it's the sin, and crap like that. but it's not defensible if you can't. So I changed my worldview. The one thing I really kept was that people are the important thing, and I became a humanist. So when I put my arguments over, and when I'm considering my biases, then that's where my bias is. I'm a humanist, so I view the people and people's rights to live and to exist as being the most important thing. So I remember making some regrettable, flippant comments that are or were bigoted. I think not horrendous, never quite the sort of gay bashing type comments that some people do. But certainly flippant comments about people's sexuality and or if somebody was camp, something along those lines, which now I've come to realize actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a bloke is camp. It makes no odds to how that person lives and what they do. And where that really had a real world impact was after I left school, I got jobs, I started to meet people in the outside world and made friends with some gay people. And realized at that point that those bigoted views, those criticisms and those judgments that you bring forwards from the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're not justified. You can't justify them. And it wasn't really till I started to meet people and saw much more of the damage that it did. Now, I was to a degree aware of the damage because there was a guy. So I grew up in Cambridge in the UK, and in our congregation there was a guy who was there most weeks, and he would sit in the one of the external meeting rooms there, and was never allowed in the Kingdom Hall. And when I was older, I asked my mum why that was, and it was because he was gay. So he would be allowed to turn up to the Kingdom Hall to listen to the meetings, but I don't know the full circumstances, and I was quite young at the time. So I know that it depends. You can be gay and baptized, but not doing anything about it. And sometimes they will let you into the hall, and sometimes they won't. I think it can also be dependent on the place as well. But I'd seen that kind of thing, but never put two and two together about how damaging that must be to be trying to balance off the faith and how you were born. And later on, when I started listening to a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews with people, and a lot of those would be with the LBGT community, and it would be talking about the experiences that those people have been through, how they've been thrown out of their home, how they'd, the mental health impacts on it. And I started learning about things like the statistics of the mental health in the LBGT. And that's a very good one where I definitely came away from the Jehovah's Witnesses with a bias there. And I had to completely change that, because I realized that when I actually started to break that down, and when I applied the critical thinking skills I'd learned to it, when I looked at the humanist view of those people, I really had to change my view on that, and not just so cosmetically. I think I had, for me, fundamentally, I had to not live a lie. It had to be me. That changed my view on that. And that's been a big one for me, and that's been a big growth thing. And things like that, the judgmental side that the Jehovah's Witnesses instill in people, that takes a long time, I think, for a lot of people to get rid of, because it becomes so much a part of you. And you're talking about trying to change fundamental bits of you, whether that's how you view a relationship with a partner, or whether it's the LBGT community or your politics or whatever. It's so built into you. You really to make those changes. And I think we know that the way cults work, they deliberately create some issues. So they deliberately create tribalism. I've talked about this kind of thing in the past. They deliberately create a pot where you're the little pot, and your group has got the truth, and everyone else is an enemy, and everyone else is scaring out to get you. And when I started learning about how cults work, that's when it dawned on me that I'd grown up in a cult. It still took 5 or 10 years for me to really sort of understand that, but that tribalistic behavior that's instilled in you from a child as well, because it comes with the childhood indoctrination as well. That stuff takes a really long time to get through and to break through. And I consider my life, my upbringing in the Jehovah's Witnesses, probably considerably less painful than others. I wouldn't say not painful, but you transfer that to somebody who's grown up with both parents and no exposure to the outside world, which I consider myself really lucky to, if you're going to grow up in that sort of situation. Having an atheist dad, give or take a bit of support or not support, but not having both parents in the religion, and being exposed to other children at school and those sorts of things did help with that a lot, I think, because when I got out, I then had the opportunity and a little bit of experience to listen to other people. Those people that were worldly people, they weren't either demon possessed or liars, which is the two stereotype. And that comes full circle back to the tribalism. We're the only ones that have got the truth. We're special. Everyone else is scary and not to be trusted, and so on. I'd say from a childhood point of view and damaging wise, it's not easy being a Jehovah's Witness in a regular school, because I have a very vivid memory, for example, of my school learning the French national anthem. We were having a French history week, and I remember being incredibly embarrassed as a child. And it doesn't sound like much, but it is essentially, it's like a form of bullying or whatever, that if you're singled out for not learning the national anthem, which is what I was singled out for, that's harmful to kids. It changes how they look out in the world. It scares them. It hurts them. There's all sorts of things like the music that I wanted to listen to, I wasn't allowed to listen to, and it's taken years for me to sort of work out that that's fine to listen to those bands. I can go listen to those bands. I remember being prevented from having an Iron Maiden T-shirt because they used to have all the skulls on them. And heavy metal being clearly the devil's music as well. Just it's all these tiny little things that they all build up to be your whole life. So not when I should have been starting to first as a teenager, starting to learn about the people I liked in terms of dating and things like that. All of that was really hard and really laboured. And a lot of teenagers are very goofy. That's fine, but you've got that added baggage with you, that you've grown up in a really, really weird environment where you're not really allowed to associate with the opposite sex or whoever it is that you happen to find attractive, and just everything that sort of gets you to being a fully fledged adult that's healthy mind, healthy interaction with other people. The Watchtower affects all of that. So that's why I threw myself into learning critical thinking, but it wasn't just critical thinking, because you've got to understand a little bit of philosophy, so you know that the way you're constructing your ideas is actually rationalized and sound. And there's a little bit of biology in there, understanding why humans respond the way they do, how humans can hold a worldview, for example, that despite all the evidence, like we've talked about this, flat Earth is a great example. How humans can hold the world view that the world is flat, even though we have a plethora of scientific evidence and rationale to say that the world is not flat, but yet still hold that. And that goes for the Jehovah's Witnesses, and pretty much every religion. You've got some are more erratic than others, but I became very interested because my mum is quite academically quite intelligent.
Yep.
She used to be able to take on me, my dad, and my brother at Scrabble and beat all of us. But as soon as you start onto the subject of religion, she relies on every fallacy going to justify her beliefs. And you can see the Watchtower speak coming through and the dumbed down ideas. And that really fascinated me. As I'd sort of got out of the defensive element of dealing with my mum and the constant harassment and started to get into the more interesting, or to me, more interesting stuff. And that sort of took me into my late 20s, early 30s, where I really started to become fascinated by that and how people hold those views, how people then keep holding them, even though there's a constant battery against them. And that's a tricky one, because we, as humans, we have some evolutionary hang-ups. So our view that when our worldviews are challenged, we know from scans on the brain that when your worldview is challenged, it triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response. That in turn triggers an adrenaline burst, and that's why when people have discussions about their what's the term, dearly held, something, whatever, cherished beliefs, worldview, basically. When they have those discussions, they get so angry. Brexit was a great example of that in the UK. It overnight turned into a vicious slanging match for those for and against Brexit in the UK. And it's very difficult to fight past that. I've spent a lot of time trying to do that, and I don't think I always do it very well. But it's something I learned about and learned to try to avoid, is responding emotionally to a challenge to my ideas about things. There's been some recent studies that have suggested that humans might also struggle just generally to change their worldview. So when you come out of such an all-encompassing cult as the Watchtower, and your views and your ideas and your ability to assess information and things like that so heavily affected, it's really, really important, I think, that ex-JWs learn a few of these skills so that they can fix some of the problems that they've inherited from their upbringing with the Watchtower and the Jehovah's Witnesses. Same goes for other groups, as they mentioned, things like Mormons and groups like that. They all have the same sort of problem. It's all a damaging environment for children to grow up in, and then that leaves adults struggling. But I feel like I'm rambling. I can talk.
No, that's fine. So just for a minute, you've touched on a number of things, and I've heard the term critical thinking come up a number of times.
Yeah.
What are you actually talking about? You've encouraged us, from what you've learned, to get onto the philosophy, the biology, the critical thinking, so you can get a full picture, your philosophies and things like that. When you talk about critical thinking, which has been brought up a number of times, why? Give us an example of what you're talking about.
Sure. So there is a bit of a reputation for Jehovah's Witnesses to be victims of pyramid schemes and things like that. What critical thinking aims to do is to give you the skeptical rationalization skills, to take any given subject and break it down into its components and work out where right should be or truth should be. I won't use a capital T, that's a dodgy thing to say with our background, but where truth is or where right is. So in the case of pyramid schemes, for example, being able to assess that what you've been offered is a pyramid scheme, and that you're unlikely to make a lot of money out of this, and that it's a bad option to go with. The critical thinking skills are really there to try and fix some of the human problems that we have. We're very, very good at pattern recognition. That's essentially what our brains do, is recognize patterns. The problem with that is that then changing those patterns. So when those patterns used to be a bush rustling meant a bear or a tiger and run, that was great. Your pattern recognition kicked in, you were triggered with an adrenaline burst, and you got out of there and the bear didn't eat you. The problem is that when it's a pyramid scheme or something equivalent to that, we haven't caught up, our brains haven't caught up with a really good ability to change that view and change that pattern recognition. So of all of the damage that the Watchtower does and that of cults do, they deliberately dumb down their arguments, and they deliberately dumb down their followers, for want of a better term. And that those critical thinking skills will just give people a chance to look at what they're doing in life. Now, so that might be how you choose and what job you choose. That might be whether friends that are causing problems in your life should still be in your life or not. It might be whether the person that you're dating is the right person for you. It might be whether you don't have sex before marriage, or whether you do have sex before marriage. Anything, any part of your life where you're making decisions and that has knock-on effect to you or to other people, whether they're positive or negative effects. A little bit of critical thinking skills goes a long way to getting you to a healthy and useful place. Another classic example, similar to the pyramid scheme, would be getting spam emails and phishing emails. Knowing not to click on that, you've just won £100,000 from a prince in Africa. You almost certainly haven't done, so don't click on the link, and certainly don't ever put your information in there. But enough people do that those criminals can make a livelihood. So if everyone had those kind of critical thinking skills and were able to apply them on a regular basis, as a species and as people, we would be in a better position.
Yep.
We're able to put as we have literally just done, able to put a rover on Mars and take pictures and send pictures back and do analysis. And yet people still fall for pyramid schemes, and they still fall for email phishing schemes and things like that. Humans have a long way to go. And I think that those of us that came from sort of cult backgrounds like the Jehovah's Witnesses have been given a disadvantage to start off with. So learning a few skills in the critical thinking and healthy skepticism. So skepticism isn't about questioning everything ever. The basics of life you don't have to question. When I drop a ball, I know it's going to drop down. I don't have to question whether that's gravity or something else that's causing that every single time. There is an unhealthy version of skepticism where you literally question every single question and then you can't get to any kind of answer. But showing some healthy skepticism, am I likely to have just won £10,000 from a prince in Africa? Probably not. That's probably a phishing scam. Equally, when you get a message from the government saying you've just been asked to partake in a coronavirus test, that's likely to be the okay. So you can check things like the critical thinking and the skepticism would be in that sort of scenario. Does the web URL look like a government URL? Does the email address look sensible? Is it asking me to give them any details, or have they provided all the details back to me? I use that as an example because I was contacted by the British government to partake in a coronavirus test. And the first thing that went through my head was, is this a scam? Because there have been some scams going on. Yep. But then I applied a little bit of critical thinking and a little bit of skepticism. I didn't click on it immediately, which is where the skepticism came in. I looked at what had been sent to me. So it was a text direct to my phone. The link it gave me was to the government gateway website. So that checks out. I did a quick Google to double check, and there was in fact information online, about the coronavirus test. And they're doing basically polling every so often to try and gauge how many people in the country have had it and how many have got antibodies and so on. So having been through some of the basic checks, to make sure that that wasn't some kind of phishing scheme or some kind of criminal enterprise, I then went ahead with that scheme, and that's where I think these skills can come in, because people can lose their life savings to this kind of thing. You can make bad decisions about who you're keeping in your life. People can be positive or detrimental to your life. The damage, obviously, that things like shunning does. There are decisions to be made around things like that. Like I say, I'm perfectly aware that if my mum or my brother found out about the sorts of things I do online in terms of debate groups and pushing back and against the Jehovah's Witnesses and the doctrines, I'm pretty sure that they would shun me. But I've worked through that in my head. I don't want it to happen. Don't want to be shunned, but I deem the damage that the Jehovah's Witnesses do to be worth that risk.
Yep.
So it's going through those little steps.
Yeah, so just going back to the critical thinking, if we break it down, say, use the example of your vaccine. You asked, what I'm trying to work out is, how do you start getting that critical thinking and changing what's up here with what we've been through? Just break it down into simple bullet points of some of the things, because it's totally foreign for us who've been brought up in the JWs to ask questions. We got told, okay, this is what it says and this is what the answer is. You don't need to do any research other than Watchtower publications.
Yes.
So how can we do that, start building on the critical thinking if we find that we've got a problem with that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I threw myself in to that with a ridiculous level of zeal, and I wouldn't expect most people to do that. I found it to be a special interest that I had. Don't expect to become a philosopher overnight and to necessarily even enjoy that kind of subject or that sort of information. It's not everybody's cup of tea. There are online courses that you can do.
Okay.
You can go to colleges, obviously pandemic notwithstanding. You can go to colleges and universities and so on and learn some of these skills.
Yep.
I've never done that. I've spent my time looking at online stuff, so things like university YouTube channels where they have information on philosophy, critical thinking, skepticism, that sort of stuff. You can arrange to do, obviously there are books and so on. So you can get out there and learn these little bits of information. You don't have to go and do a formal education to learn some of these skills. And I think most people, it probably wouldn't suit to do a formal education in it. But Googling, so go onto YouTube or onto Google to find some of the university websites. There's lots of information out there. I know Wikipedia is criticized sometimes, but it's not a bad place to start. Sometimes that will give you some links to go and look elsewhere and to start looking at it. And I found myself podcasts to be very helpful, skepticism and critical thinking podcasts, where they take subjects, whatever your personal view is on subject X, doesn't really matter, but they'll take a subject and they'll break it down into its elements. They'll talk about the biases that people bring into that subject matter. They'll talk about the emotional and psychological elements that people bring into those, and the evidence and how you rationalize all that up into some kind of an end worldview or opinion on things. So I'm trying to steer clear of comments because I'm left-leaning in my politics. So what I'm trying to do with some of this is try to avoid using examples that might upset some people, because that's their worldview. I'm trying not to ditch on the right or attack anything specific. And hopefully things like flat earth are relatively easy ones and relatively benign ones to sort of use as an example of that. But there's a lot of sources online. I can't imagine what it was like to try and lead the Jehovah's Witnesses prior to the internet. I was lucky because I had my first computer at 18 and I left at 15, so there wasn't much of a gap between me leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses and the internet really becoming a big thing. Prior to that, I wouldn't have liked to have done that, but you can find a lot of information online. That's what I would suggest as being the primary source.
Yeah.
And then if you're interested in it, then further education. It's not the demon it's made out to be by the Jehovah's Witnesses.
So those are some of the things that you did. What would you say to a person that is really struggling to even come to grips with critically thinking?
Don't put pressure on yourself, first of all. You're trying to change things that you learnt that are fundamental to your person. You're trying to change those. And that takes time and it takes effort, and you can't really force that to happen. It's something that will come with time. So start reading about critical thinking or listening to podcasts, watching YouTube, reading university philosophical posts, whatever it is that you happen to want to do on that particular subject, and just allow it to happen, because it will happen over time. Our brains are very, very good at picking up on things and learning things. But you're talking about changing those pattern recognitions that you've built in your formative years, and that's not easy. The younger you do it, the better, because the less patterns you've formed and set in stone. But just take time. Don't put pressure on yourself. I think, again, this is a good thing to unlearn from the Jehovah's Witnesses as well. That pressure to be the best at everything at all times, and never to have any time to yourself, and to decompress how you feel about things. That's crap. It's high pressure stuff that cults use to stop people from ever thinking about what they're doing. If you've done 20 hours field service, why have you not done 30? If you've done 30 hours, why have you not done 40? It's a constant pressure, and that is a cult thing. You can leave that behind. There is absolutely no need to put any pressure on yourself to change. Some people may change quickly. Some people will take some time. That's just a perfectly natural part of how your brain and how your body will cope with these changes. And everyone has blind spots and weaknesses and biases that they don't realize about. So again, taking that pressure away, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about immediately changing your worldview and everything you think about straight away. You can pick a little thing here and there. What do I think about this? What do I think about the environment? Or what do I think about my politics? You're not allowed to vote as a Jehovah's Witness. So suddenly you're thrown into a world outside of the organization. You can suddenly vote. How do you vote? What sits well with you? Learning to read between what the politicians say and what their party's ethics are, and so on. You can break those down. You can learn a little bit. There's loads of information online. Obviously, you do have to be wary. There's also misleading information online. But again, that's where, as you start to learn the critical thinking skills, you'll start to be able to look at that. So if I'm looking at an article, the first thing I do is say, well, who does this article? Do I recognize them? Are they likely to be a trustworthy source? What are their biases? So I read, for example, a lot of left-leaning newspapers. So I know that the bias is there, and I'm looking for that bias. So when I want to understand a story, I'm looking for that bias and how that might impact that story.
Yep.
So if it's criticizing, so the government currently has a right-wing, quite unfortunately right-wing government. If I'm reading my left-leaning news article and it's criticizing them, I won't take that on face value. I want to understand what's being said, whether that's a reasonable criticism, because I'm not going to criticize a right-wing government just because they're right-wing and I'm left-leaning. I will criticize an individual action because it's harmful, because it's not well thought out, because whatever. But it takes time to get to that and to get out of those habits. Yeah, basically. But take that pressure off yourself. Don't think that you have to learn everything at all points and be suddenly the super person at everything, because nobody can be. I should also add to this that I know I've told you, and I'm not worried about this being public. So my daughter was diagnosed as higher functional autistic recently. So was I. I've learned a lot about it recently, and one of the things I learned about was that higher functioning autistic people tend to have autistic people tend to have special interests. Higher functioning autistic people tend to absolutely throw themselves at special interests.
Yeah.
So a good example, which I've used before, is Einstein is believed to be a higher functioning autistic person. So when I said about don't worry about, like, I really threw myself in at a stupid level of learning about this. I now know that I did that almost certainly because of my nature and how I am. And I tend to do that if it's a subject I like. I really throw myself in and learn a load about it. Not everyone's like that. Don't have that kind of pressure on you to learn things really well, learn things quickly. Just learn it as you go. Let your brain change its patterns. And over time, you should see benefits, because you should see that you're able to have a conversation about politics at work with a friend without being completely railroaded. Or it might be that you can have a conversation about relationships or football or whatever it is, or science, whatever subject you want to have it. But you can have those discussions without feeling some of that toxic cultural stuff that we all learnt in the Jehovah's Witnesses. Hopefully have a better life for it, I hope.
Yeah. So obviously you've learned a great deal with regards to critically thinking. Would you say it's benefited you?
Definitely, yes. So for me personally, I absolutely had to work out what my world's view was on everything when I realized that the arguments I was having with my mum and the Jehovah's Witnesses arguments, I was making I had a bad worldview. Not that the impacts of that worldview was bad, but the reasoning behind it was poorly constructed. And I had to get to a place where I was sure that I had a good position, and I have multiple times changed those positions as better arguments and better information have come across on things. In terms of an outlook, it means that I don't feel. So I work in IT, for example. I'm quite comfortable pulling apart. My job is data mining and reporting. So for me, the ability to take a question from my boss or whoever's asking the question and to go find that information is a problem to solve. Those critical thinking skills help me with my work, because I'm able to go, well, I know this, and I work in the energy industry, which is an incredibly complicated industry. I'm able to apply that to my job. I try to apply that to my politics. I try to apply that to my friends and my relationships with how I have raised my children. So my children are taught to not think things because daddy said them. My children are taught to question things and want to know why a thing is a thing, and not to have that. I'm probably going quite strongly the other way because of my upbringing, but I don't want my children to be voting the way I vote because I vote. That's nonsense. If I vote left and my children vote left because of that, and there's somebody else who's voting right and their children vote right, we haven't got to a good position. We're both using the same arguments. They're a null and void argument, if that makes sense. So I want my children to be able to form their views based on the evidence and based on a rationale, and hopefully have better lives for it, because I've got two girls. I don't want them to be, I don't want them to have their lives restricted by misogyny, for example. I want them to have healthy relationships with their partners, whoever those might be. I want all of those sorts of things. I want to be. This is where the humanism comes in, really. I want people to be as safe and as happy as they possibly can, because as far as I'm concerned, we only have one life that we know of. We can't evidence anything else. So we really need to enjoy our time. And I feel that we've been dealt a rough hand starting off in a cult, and that trying to get out of that and trying to find positives and find positive way to live is the most important thing. Again, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine.
My personal ramblings, and people can disagree if they would like.
Well, that's what humans should be able to do.
Absolutely.
We don't have to agree with everything, but we also don't need to be upset and get angry like some of the things you were talking earlier with maybe some of the views your mum has versus what intellectually she doesn't have.
Yeah.
So what's your life looking like now? You've gone through all these things.
If I can just pick up on a point you said there, just very quickly. The environment that the Jehovah's Witnesses have of non-confrontational, that's a difficult one to come out of into the real world, because you go from having this false environment with a bunch of people you wouldn't, so some you will like and love and so on. But if you think, like, I can think back to my congregation of 120 people, I think it was. I can't imagine that there was more than half a dozen people I either liked or loved in that group.
Yep.
That's not a healthy environment. That's not a great way for people to be. And when you go out into the real world and you're working at, you're going to come across people that you disagree with. You're going to have difficult friendships and so on.
Yep.
Learning those sorts of skills so that you can remove some of the emotion and some of the passivity. I'm sure I've pronounced that right, but the passive behavior that you've been taught and learned is going to help you, because you're going to have more positive relationships for those sorts of things, more positive jobs, those sorts of experiences.
Right.
Sorry, just thought it was an important point there.
Yeah, no, that's good. We quite often don't think about it because they've already got a group of friends that we have to sort of hang around with. So that's good. Okay, so all those sorts of things help you wipe your... Well, have you got over everything yet?
No.
Okay, so it's just the start.
So I'm 42.
Yep.
No, absolutely not. When there's a knock at the door and I'm not expecting a delivery, the Jehovah's Witnesses regularly, before the pandemic, came around this area. It will trigger me. I'll get massive adrenaline rushes. I struggle, although I am a forceful character or forceful personality. I don't like confrontation particularly. I won't shy away from it, but I don't like it. I get a lot of adrenaline rushes from that. I think that there's still issues from the childhood, particularly when things I think I should have been able to do come up, like Christmas and birthdays for my kids and those sorts of things. There's times over Christmases with my wife's family are lovely, and we always go to their house for Christmas, because obviously we don't go to my parents' house for Christmas.
No.
And I've been left just with no idea what's going on at certain times because of that lack of experience of experiencing normal stuff, like going to somebody's house for Christmas or going to a birthday party. I find I forget, this may be because I'm male, but I forget to do certain things like sorting out cards and things like that in advance, because it just, I think it's habit stuff. You didn't form those habits as a child, and then it doesn't come naturally to me. And while it's just a cultural thing, and technically cultural things are man-made and blah, 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 they're still part of our lives and how we interact and to do with our happiness and things. So there's definitely things that are still there. I think my biggest flaw is being judgmental, which definitely comes from the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's also a common trait in the autism spectrum as well. So I suspect that those two things combined, a unhealthy upbringing with the neurodiversity, is probably not a great combination.
So that's some of the things you're dealing with now. Would you say, with the work you've done on yourself, that you've actually improved from earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very comfortable with my world and with how I am as a person. some of the things I've learned to do is just accept that I don't like certain things. I do like other things. I'm not trying to force myself into that shell that you get given as a Jehovah's Witness.
Yep.
Things like, just silly things as well. Some of it, things like I hate wearing suits, but I know that other people really enjoy them. But for me, it's something that's really uncomfortable. And not feeling like I have to wear a suit to be presentable in a meeting at work and those sorts of things. It can be little things like that, but little things like that affect your day-to-day well-being.
Definitely.
And it's very rare that with your well-being, it's one thing that breaks you. It's usually many things on top of other. There might be one catastrophe that maybe finishes you off. But, a lot of the time, it's lots of little things. You're living your life where you're not comfortable with this and you're not comfortable with that, and you don't know how to deal with that. And I'm not saying that I have every answer. I obviously don't, and I screw up all the time and so on. But the pressures and the problems that the cult life created for me, I feel like I've gotten past a lot of those. So I'm comfortable with my job and with dealing with the way I work and with dealing with people at work when there's arguments or disagreements. I'm comfortable with the way I did my relationship stuff, as a later adult. The way I supported people when they needed help. I've ended up, and I think we've talked about this before, about the organizational skills and some of the positives that you learn from the Jehovah's Witnesses. I've talked a lot about the negatives. There are positives about presentation skills, the ability to talk in front of people, to organize, those sorts of things. I have ended up with my hobby life. I've ended up organizing a lot of my friends. And as you can probably see from behind me, wargaming is one of my hobbies.
I wondered what was in the cabinet. I could see that. I wondered if you'd like Star Wars, because one of those looks like an X-Wing.
Yeah, on that side, there's lots of Star Wars stuff up there. I take this as a positive from my JW upbringing, that I've always been good at organizing and good at taking control of things. And I've ended up running a lot of clubs. On a couple of occasions, I've had really sweet, endearing, positive feedback, just saying that those people have been going to those clubs for years, but it's the time that I was running it where they really enjoyed it and things like that. And it's little moments like that I take away. If I can have helped a few people through my life to have better lives, that means a lot to me as a humanist. To have helped people means a lot to me. So those are the positives that I take out of it.
Sure.
I keep trying to work on those.
So we've seen the progress from when you were, the first 15 odd years of your life to where you are now. What sort of things are you going to look forward to into the future? You got many goals for yourself and your family?
Yes. So my eldest autism presents some difficulties for our family. We have chosen to homeschool, which my initial reaction when my wife suggested it was not positive.
Yep.
My association with the Jehovah's Witnesses. But the homeschooling environment has changed an awful lot. Again, this is where the critical thinking and the skepticism came in. My instant response was no, religious nuts and science deniers are the only people that homeschool. But I actually then, when I looked into it and found out that's not the case now, there's a lot of people choosing to homeschool. And there's a lot of resources available for that. So her needs, the kids' needs, there's the high probability that the younger one will be as well. We'll have some kind of neurodiversity. They're pretty much dominating our life at the moment. So we've reset up our life to account for that. So I've kept working. Excuse me. While my wife has, she was made redundant while she was pregnant, and we took that opportunity to take the money and to look after the kids. So rather than trying to battle through these sorts of things, we've learned an awful lot about the neurodiverse spectrum and how we need to adjust our parenting to that, which has taught me a lot about myself as well. And we are basically just trying to get the girls through into their late teens in a happy, healthy way. And then we'll worry about where we go from there.
All right.
So that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Cool.
Keep trying to improve on the things that I think I'm not good at.
Yep.
And that's also something that I think we take from the organization, is the inability to admit that we might not be good at something or right at something, or any admission that maybe we need to change. And I think that's, everyone should improve over their life. If you think just about our understanding of science now against 20 years ago, against 20 years before that, and 20 years before that, we understand how much damage we're doing to the environment, for example. So changing your view on how you should behave with environmental friendly things, for example, it doesn't have to be necessarily groundbreaking things, but we should always be changing.
Absolutely.
And not stuck in that conservative view.
Cool. Just had a comment come in.
Yeah.
Helen has to go, but she felt it was a very good subject and wanted to say thanks for sharing the points that you've shared with us. And I have to agree. We don't always remember what it was like, where we've come from, how those things affect us. And we do have to sit back and go, why am I feeling this way?
Yeah. I've had loads of conversations with people at work talking about my upbringing versus theirs. And I see their faces turning to horror.
They don't get it.
They don't get it. And you don't realize how unusual and abstract and harmful and weird those upbringings are. And sometimes it's not till the years later you have a clash with somebody over something, and you start to realize that there's of how that is. I mean, I can rabbit. That's possibly part of my autistic traits, but I can talk and talk and talk. But I hope it's been helpful for people.
I'll get you to say one more thing.
Yep, that's always difficult.
Let's see how we go. If you were to give one practical thing of encouragement to ones who are listening now and later on, what would it be?
Don't be afraid of change, I think. Okay. Change is absolutely fine. So we come from, the Jehovah's Witnesses are a conservative group, ultra conservative, really, if you're putting it on the scale of things. And change is just not allowed except for when they flip-flop.
Cool.
Don't be afraid of that. Allow yourself to change, allow yourself to learn. And enjoy.
Good.
Enjoy yourself.
That's a great way to finish our live stream. We want to say thank you, Ben, for being part of our live stream. Thank you for those ones who've watched, made comments, and we look forward to being able to see who else in the coming months that we can learn. We've heard from Ben that even though he was there for the first 15 years of his life, basically, it affects him to this day. There are some things that are not going to disappear quickly. Mm-hmm. And like he said, give yourself a chance. Don't pressure yourself. Work at these things slowly so that, to be honest, you can have a happy life and start to dare to dream. So thank you once again, everybody, for being here. We've certainly appreciated it, and we look forward to being able to see you again on our next live stream. Just to give you an idea, we have a XJW who is fully qualified as a psychotherapist next week. It's not going to be on a Sunday because he's in Peru. It will be New Zealand time on Tuesday, which most of everybody else's time has been Monday, thanks to their time zone. And what a great guy. His name is Ryan. He's part of our group, and he has a great deal of understanding that can help us. And so we look forward to seeing you all then. Until then, thanks for coming. We'll catch you again soon.